Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session on fighting deepfakes, transformative approaches to protect your business. My name is Maya Ogranovich-Scott, and I'm a senior solution manager at Ping, overseeing our fraud detection and prevention solutions. My focus is on identity fraud threats and vertical use cases, and I'm lucky enough to be joined today by a fantastic technical expert to help dive deep on deepfakes.
Hi, my name is Daryl Goyce. I'm product lead for Neo. It's been about 25 years since I've been in the industry and been around all this biometric technology and also credentialing and wallets for a long time.
All right, so let's talk about deepfakes. Advancements in AI technology have really changed the threat landscape recently. So let's talk today about deepfake technology, the way it's used by cybercriminals, and what you need to know to avoid being the next victim. We're going to talk about the current state of deepfake identity threats, some common attack vectors and points of weakness. We'll provide sample scenarios across industries and use cases. We'll discuss some new threats on the horizon, and then we'll show you some ways to mitigate deepfake-related fraud. There's a lot to cover today, so let's go ahead and get started. So let's start by talking a little bit about where we are today and why deepfakes are such a big problem. In order to better show the scope of the issue, we're going to provide some real-world examples of deepfake fraud in the news. Okay, first story. A lot of people have heard this one by now. In February of 2024, a Hong Kong-based employee at a multinational firm was tricked into paying out $25 million to fraudsters after attending a conference call with what he assumed were several key members of his company's staff, including the CFO. In fact, the employee was actually the only real human on that call, and the rest of the attendees were deepfake video recreations. So this employee had initially received a message that he correctly suspected was a phishing email, purportedly from the company's CFO, discussing the need for this secret transaction. And that's a story we've all heard before, right? And the employee was right to be suspicious. But then he attended the call. Everyone looked and sounded exactly like the senior colleagues he recognized, and he was convinced to ignore that gut feeling that something was wrong and make the transfer. I do not think that this man was stupid. I do not think that this man was careless. He just got unlucky in being the first victim of this new type of corporate heist.
And another incident involved a company hiring an IT worker that was actually working for North Korea as a state-sponsored actor. And this is becoming a real issue. The Department of Homeland Security, as well as the UK Home Office, have put out circulars and notifications out to corporations warning them about this. So in this case, what happens is usually a real US, for example, identity is stolen, and then a face swap is done and a fake ID is created, and they're remotely onboarded as an IT worker, and they're actually working on behalf of a US citizen's name and address and everything, but getting paid to a bank account of their choosing, and when they set up with HR. So this is a way to funnel money to these governments, and it's becoming very prolific. So there's a bait and switch challenge at hiring, and then also this deepfake stolen identity challenge as well. And we have firsthand experiences of this, by the way, with our customers. So we have seen this pattern, and we know exactly how to detect it.
Yeah, and this one is really interesting because these IT workers, these North Korean IT workers in particular, are being sponsored by the government. They're being chosen like promising programmers, etc. And they are doing a government sponsored job for their government, specifically trying to get into infrastructure in countries that that government wants to siphon money out of, get information from, etc. So this is definitely becoming a bigger and bigger issue as we go. All right, so from the workforce scenario, let's change a little bit tactics and talk about a customer scenario. So this next story involves a crime ring that used deepfakes to perpetuate romance scams. They ultimately stole millions of dollars from victims by cultivating relationships with their targets and then eventually encouraging them to invest in fraudulent crypto platforms. They used face swapping technology, and just like Daryl said, this is getting quite easy to do. We'll show you exactly how that works in a minute. So they created these convincing profiles and they tricked victims into believing that they were interacting with real people. These types of fake crypto investment scams are colloquially called pig butchering scams. That's why you see that image of that pig on the news article. And I think Daryl has another example of something similar to this as well.
Yeah, this was pretty famous incident because of Elon Musk's name in it. But basically, a fake investment opportunity was created, and they were using AI technology to record fake videos effectively of Elon Musk and other relevant investors that carry cachet, carry weight to a corporation, of course. And that is easy to convince people to invest money if you think that these name brand folks that are in the industry and leaders in the technology industry are part of the company. So this too can be very dangerous and a great way to siphon money off if you're a hacker.
Yep. All right. So Ping recently did a survey of over 700 IT and security decision makers worldwide. 52% of respondents said that they were fully confident that they could detect a deepfake of their CEO. Others were less sure. Given the news stories that we just reviewed, this is a serious problem, and that 52 might even be too high and an example of perhaps a bit too much hubris. So it does show that many people understand that human eyes and ears just aren't enough to know what's real anymore, and that we need some sort of defenses that can do more. So deepfakes have actually been around for a while, but as the technology has continued to evolve, we have seen new and concerning trends emerge. I'm going to have Daryl walk through some of the things that are being done and talk about what's happened recently that makes them so incredibly hard to stop.
Yeah, this this is an example of one of the first ones that came out that had a major impact on the threat posture for corporations and organizations that were nervous about this. Deepface Live is was one of the first ones where you could capture just a few frames of imagery or photos of somebody and create a full-on animation of the person's face. Later on, they added audio as well, and we're going to talk some more about some other technologies that have even improved on this. But the point is, the accessibility of this is to the point where many of it's open source.
Mhm.
And if it's not open source, it's just a small monthly fee to get access to these SaaS services to be able to take in audio, video, and be able to manipulate it and replace the faces and the voices. So it's pretty amazing how the technology has evolved, and we're going to see some more examples here.
Yeah, I will say too, for audio deepfakes, they're so easy that I recently experimented with cloning my own voice, and I got it to a point where it sounded very realistic. It took me maybe 15 minutes of tweaking some dials and switches to make a very realistic deepfake of my voice, saying words I've never said before in my entire life, right? But it sounded just like me. It had my cadence, it had my voice, and someone who heard me say over the phone would very easily be scammed, and it's being used in that way as well.
Yeah, this is another great example. This was a open source tool that came up on GitHub, and it actually rose to the top last summer as the number one downloaded and rated app on all of GitHub as open source. And it was by a lot. It was a significant number of downloads over the second and third ranking software that was downloaded. So it's incredible. Again, the accessibility it's important that the organizations understand this is not highly sophisticated stuff. It's pretty easy to get to this stuff, get access, and to utilize it. And the user interfaces are so easy to use now that you don't have to be that sophisticated.
Yeah, because the technology is technically being created for quote unquote harmless purposes, right? For entertainment, to make fun videos. And so under the guise of that, it's being released, very easily used by people to do those things for entertainment. But intelligent threat actors are looking at it and going, there are things I can do with this to illegally make quite a lot of money.
Yeah, this is another good example where you can actually just do real-time face swapping. So if you have a video of yourself, it's very easy now to overlay a video, a face structure over your face and become someone else. And even swapping, between male and female and things like that. It's becoming very, very sophisticated. And you can see the video at the bottom is illustrating how you could rapidly change the same video stream real time across multiple channels and be multiple people, even facing different channels, different endpoints on the other side.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting here, if you look at some of these images, some of the things that we looked for with older, less sophisticated deepfakes where things would look strange when you touched your face, or if you were wearing headphones, or, wearing glasses or anything like that. And a lot of these new technologies have really done away with those odd little giveaways that we used to look for, and they have become far more convincing.
Definitely.
So let's talk a little bit about where and how we're seeing these types of crimes happen. So deepfakes have grown at massive rates every single year. Uh, Over here on the left, you're going to see a graph. Notably, in 2024, countries with the most deepfakes detected um, were China, Spain, Germany, Ukraine, the US, Vietnam, and the UK, just by numbers. But interestingly, although we saw an explosion of deepfake growth in countries holding elections, so we saw 303% growth in the US, 500% in Mexico, a staggering 3,000% in Bulgaria, right? But we also saw massive growth in countries without elections as well, 2,800% in China, as an example, and really big numbers across multiple nations in Asia and South America without elections happening as well. So, although there was a lot of concern that deepfake crime would particularly explode specifically in relation to it being an election year, while we definitely did see spikes in countries with elections, we also saw countries without elections having massive, massive spikes of deepfake growth as well. So, although that's one factor that might contribute to their growth, it is definitely not the only thing to look for. Meanwhile, organizations are also seeing an increase in both audio and video deepfakes being used in attempts to commit fraud. So it's about half of organizations that are reporting that they have detected or had these types of attacks hit them last year, which is a significant increase over the last time they were surveyed in 2022, where audio deepfakes were at 37% of organizations and video only at 29%. So the growth is pretty significant.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And the fact that non-political use cases are also proliferating, I think that really is a sign that this technology is being used across many attack vectors for many purposes.
Okay, so now that we've talked a little bit about the history of deepfakes, where we are seeing them hit now, some of the news stories about the types of attacks that you might expect, let's actually talk about how these technological developments that we just looked at are being used by bad actors. And I'm going to hand this over to Daryl to give you a comprehensive understanding of exactly how a deepfake crime happens.
Yeah. So the first thing obviously is getting access to data. So whoever you want to be able to impersonate or to modify. In some cases, it's social media is a great place to go collect data. Other cases, it could be hacking even cloud stores, data vaults, and things that people use for their personal videos and that sort of thing. Um, Once you have the audio and video you want, it's there's two major patterns that we see on methods to inject yourself, as it were, and take over. The first one is where there may be a live conference or video going, and a man in the middle is actually attack is actually done. That's the bottom diagram where you actually inject yourself into the middle of the stream and take over. And you can still have the same face, obviously, as what the initial person that started the conference would have, video conference, for example. And of course, you can have their voice, and then you can change the experience completely. And so one way is through that cloud interaction through an attack that's what's called man in the middle attack in the cloud. The other one is the one on top, which is where you have control and you're maybe initiating the interaction and you're actually injecting data into your phone, into your hardware, a desktop computer or a mobile device. And then just a point to point. Now there's just two parties in the transaction instead of three. And you're actually now interacting as another person directly in that conversation. And so the whole point here is deceiving the remote party in both cases, both with audio and video, and changing the course, as it were, of the conversation, or to take over, like a bait and switch model, take over and be part of an experience like getting a job, being hired somewhere as a remote worker, for example.
Yeah. All right, and let's talk about some of the new developments. These have come out kind of quietly. I haven't seen a lot of hype about this, but I think we need to talk about this. Um, we are seeing now the ability to create a remarkably realistic video deepfake from a single still image. And I'll let Daryl kind of talk about this in more detail, but what I think is interesting, this image you see on the right is uh a young Albert Einstein giving a lecture that he never gave. There's a video of this as well. The words are not his, right? And a single still photograph of him was used to generate this.
Yeah, and they actually also got audio from old interviews that he had,
Mhm.
and they used that to create his voice. So the actual original photo is actually a pretty famous photograph, him standing in front of the chalkboard, but they took that and made it into a full lecture with all full audio. And the key here is the quality of the information and the ability also to take a front-on photo, a photo of maybe a person front-facing, and replicate them standing sideways, a profile image, and do it very, very accurately and convincingly. And the other thing they can do now with this technology and similar apps, software that's been released, is they actually inject humanistic mistakes into the speech and humanistic mistakes and quirks into the way they talk. And if they have videography of the person that to examine, they can replicate even little nuances of how they interact and their facial gestures and things like this. So it's pretty amazing now the accuracy. And of course, like you said before, Maya, the initial intent of this is to help make movies and kind of the next generation CGI, right? For education and teaching, for CEOs to be able to speak in all different languages and present their products and stuff like that. But of course, it's going to be used and is being used for nefarious purposes.
Yeah, this technology was developed and released by ByteDance, which is the company that owns TikTok. So obviously the intent is functionally harmless, and is entertainment, but also the ability to provide education and various other things. But in the hands of a bad actor, this becomes very, very dangerous. So now that you see, let's say they've gotten a photograph of your CEO, maybe they have some audio recording of them giving a keynote somewhere that they can use to clone their voice. And so, they're creating a deep fake of that, or maybe of some member of your family and they're pulling their voice from social media. Once the threat actor has actually made the deep fake, here are some of the ways we're seeing bad actors actually using the technology. This isn't an exhaustive list, but here are some of the threats that our customers have come to talk to us about. Let's start with the workforce scenario. At the point of employee onboarding, we are seeing deepfakes used with synthetic or fake identities. We're seeing bait and switch in employment, in applications, where somebody will be hired to do an interview who is an expert, in the place of the person who's actually getting hired. And then that person will take the job, or, something more nefarious like those state-sponsored attacks from North Korea. We're seeing executive impersonation happening. And we're seeing attempts to get privileged access by impersonating someone who might have that. What would you add to those, Daryl?
I think it's a good, good coverage that you've had. For workforce, their main concern is obviously access to these critical resources is a big, big one. And that's why many times they go after IT jobs or administrative jobs. We've even seen cases where executive positions were actually not who they say they are. And so we were really surprised to hear that in some cases. But if you're a small business, you may not, immediately have them fly over to interact in person. And so you may get at least significantly down the road of hiring them and never have met them yet. So it can be a challenge.
Yeah, before you realize something is wrong. So this is the scenario that gets a lot of the big news stories with, CEO impersonation and state-sponsored North Korean hackers taking jobs at security companies in the US. But there's actually quite a lot that we are seeing in the customer use case. Specifically in financial services, we're seeing a lot of deepfakes and synthetic identities being used in loan origination. We are seeing deepfakes being used with wealth management companies to, let's say impersonate a very wealthy client or to impersonate the wealth manager, right? We see it kind of on both sides. Obviously, investment scams like the ones that we talked about earlier, lots and lots of call center fraud and various telephone-based fraud. A lot of scams that used to rely on text messages are now moving to phone calls, things like grandparent scams. Um,
Yeah.
and so all of these scams are kind of hitting consumers. And the reason that this matters so much, not just because each of us is individually a consumer, but in a lot of cases, depending on the regulations of the country that you're doing business in, the institution from where the money was taken by the consumer who was scammed may be responsible for reimbursing them, even though they were the ones who were scammed. So it's definitely in the best interest of these institutions to not have these losses happen in the first place.
Yeah, and what we're also seeing is it used to be they would go after the low-hanging fruit, maybe smaller personal loans, which are pretty easy to get. But now they're with the tools that are available, they're going big, they're going bold, and they're going after large mortgages for homes and things like that. Even cases where they have to appear in person with a notary and
Mhm.
have someone notarize a document, they actually impersonate the fake with the fake ID and everything in front of that notary. And so the technology is getting so good with these fake IDs, the notaries can't tell the difference in person when they examine the document. So it's amazing how the tools are enabling very aggressive, bold moves now on these parts of these hackers.
Yeah, and so then of course there's sort of the middle road, right? This conversation about B2B is really heating up in identity spaces and in security spaces, and a lot of times that third-party ecosystem is the cause of breaches. It's the cause of all sorts of problems because securing a B2B ecosystem is really hard. What we see in the B2B ecosystem when it relates to deepfakes specifically is again at the point of onboarding, the onboarding of partners, the screening of contractors, right? And bait and switch in the supply chain as well. So you might have one company that you've actually vetted to, let's say, deliver goods, and then somebody completely different shows up, takes the load, and disappears. Just kind of into the abyss, and you've lost all of the money that was associated with all of the goods that you sent to ship.
Yeah, we personally are working closely with one of the fastest growing transportation companies in the United States, and they're a broker between the trucking industry, truck drivers, and the carriers. And this is a big problem. In fact, a lot of the analyst firms have dedicated teams around logistics fraud because it is such a large issue. And so being able to proof and vet these folks up front, know who they are in advance, and then verify them when they show up to pick up the load, it's huge, a huge advancement now over
Yeah,
what was before.
it's incredibly important. All right, so with all of that in mind, let's talk about some solutions for these types of threats, and we will show you a couple of things that you can do to actually ensure that your business isn't the next news story, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's three main, attack vectors here illustrated and different steps to it. But the first one, of course, is that government ID, being able to have some kind of a fake ID or a change in that government ID. So being able to authenticate the evidence that's presented by the individual and make sure it's not been something that has been modified, tampered with, or has been generated from scratch. For example, using generative AI. And part of the process of that is the authentication, looking at all different security features, all different aspects of that document, and then also looking at the liveness of that document. Is it a picture of a picture, or is it something that was taken remotely across a room, even? So things like that to help make sure that it's a live document and it's in possession of the individual. And that's leading to what we call verifiable credentials. Once you go through that nice proofing one time, if you can then issue a verifiable credential in a digital wallet that represents that proofing event, you can uniquely bind that identity, the unique identity of the person, with the proofing metadata, the proofing level of assurance, along with the device, binding it to the device, and finally, even binding it to the entitlements or permissions that you're giving that person. And that's all cryptographically encapsulated in a verifiable credential that can be used later and at a much lower cost be able to validate and verify that Daryl is still Daryl. Part of the process of doing the identity verification is the selfie match, matching the selfie against the photo that's on the government ID itself, or maybe in a database somewhere. And also, as part of that, making sure that nobody is injecting anything into the stream. Remember, we mentioned up in the cloud, you can inject and take over a session, or you can also be on your own device as a fraudster and inject fake imagery in with the camera in the hardware. So both of those, being able to detect that and prevent that is critical in the process. Also, the liveness of the image, not again taking a photo of a photo or displaying a video on a screen of a phone and a mobile device and capturing that. And then, of course, the matching technology is important as well, and that accuracy of being able to do the selfie matching itself. Finally, the audio channels, the other side of this, because of things like video conferences and interactions that include audio, help desk calls, it's important also to have technology to help detect spoofing of audio and generation of audio, synthetic voices. And so there is technology for that. And finally, also playback, something that's been recorded by on a recorder, even a digital format recorder, and then replaying that of another person's voice. And then, of course, the voice matching itself, making sure that the voices match what's on file from previously. So these are the three major, kind of lanes that we look at and the technology we deliver to help prevent any kind of spoofing and deep fakes here. So the products that we use here at Ping and that we offer to our customers is under the solution brand called Neo. And you can think of it as Identity Reinvented. It's a solution set brand. And as part of that, we have two major modules, Ping One Verify and also Ping One Credentials. And they're basically the flip side of the same coin. So identity verification and proofing up front, deriving the results of that and issuing out a digital credential to the individual. And then once again, verifying it downstream, that digital credential in the future. So I call it the verify sandwich. You verify, you issue the credential, then you verify again downstream. And this decentralized approach is a lot more secure. It actually increases privacy, it improves security, and it can also improve user experience whenever it's implemented properly. And that's why a lot of the analysts have declared this technology transformational. And having the ability to also do out-of-band identity verification. So if someone is interacting with a web browser, which is connected to APIs on the back end, or if they're going in through a federated model like OpenID Connect, it's really nice to be able to do an out-of-band verification that's separate from the main channel that you're interacting with the individual on. And that helps prevent the deep fakes as well, because you're doing an out-of-band check, maybe even a mutual identification of person at each end to make sure that Daryl's really talking to me at this moment. And so all of these products here include detailed and very deep and broad technologies to help detect and prevent deep fakes.
So let's talk about verified trust a little bit because you sort of alluded to this earlier, but I think it's really interesting that it is possible to do this now to really stop these bad actors right at the moment when they're trying to do something fishy.
Yes, absolutely. So, in the traditional federated models, you're interacting through the sky, in the sky, and in the cloud. And so the idea here is to kind of snip that wire in the cloud and kind of reroute it through the wallet. And having double cryptography as part of the credentialing and biometrics built into the credential, maybe also PIN codes, for example, by rerouting the interaction through that wallet and enforcing that the hackers and the fraudsters get very frustrated. And this includes for adversarial AI as well as for generative AI attacks. And so by having this experience, the system of record or the system that you're interacting with, the resource, can trigger an out-of-band experience with the individual and do a verification. So this is done through a push notification that goes to the digital wallet directly. It detects that the proper credentials are present and then triggers the presentation of those one or more credentials that are in that wallet. And that those the keys are verified. So it's double cryptography that's done to verify that the wallet information is correct to that user and the binding is right. And then the issuer who issued the credential is legitimate and who you trust as an issuer. So all of that can be done very rapidly. So in this model being displayed here is a system. You could be out walking the dog in the park with your spouse and get this push notification say, hey, we need to have you approve something, for example, right? Or it could be as part of a request that's made by the individual, and then an out-of-band push to the individual to check, hey, do you really, or is it really you making this request?
Yeah, let's talk about peer-to-peer verification a little bit.
Absolutely. The other model here is instead of a system talking to an individual or interacting with an individual, it's two individuals like you and I now interacting. And so having a peer-to-peer model is very handy, very worthwhile to help create a separate out-of-band channel to be able to verify the identity of the person on the other end. This could be done for phone calls, for video conference calls, or if it's an email that you get. Maybe you get an email that comes in, you want to double check. And as part of this, you can actually have a small message. So it's a secure messaging service as well. The wallets can talk to each other in a secure fashion. And so you can think of it as a secure envelope of information that you can ask the question of the person at the other end. They have to do a verification and then they can answer you and give you an answer to that question. It's especially good for high value transactions. If the CEO is on with you, is it really the CEO? Maybe I
Yeah,
can
is it
ping
really
the
the CEO telling you to make that $25 million transfer? If you have this,
exactly.
you can know for sure before you hit send on the
You
money.
got it. You got
So
it. So you can ping the CEO and do a quick check.
yeah, so this is what it looks like on the requester end, and then this is the responder side of the same
Exactly.
thing where you receive that request, right? So if somebody
Correct.
is reaching out to you going, did you just send that email? Is it really you on this video call with me right now, etc. And then this is kind of how you would reply.
Yes. And the content that's in the message you can trust because the verification is guaranteed to back to the responder's information is guaranteed back to the requester. And so it's all bound together very securely, and it's obviously includes that double cryptography to be able to do the chat.
Yeah, it's pretty slick. All right. Well, I believe that's all the time that we have together today, unfortunately. Thank you so much for being here with me, Daryl, and thank you, audience, for your time and attention. Hopefully, you learned something new or interesting. And as always, if you want to talk more deeply about any of these topics, we invite you to reach out to us at any time, and we would be happy to help.
Thank you very much, Maya.
Thank you.